Laughlin and her daughter also lost lucrative entertainment deals and sponsors. Laughlin was cut from the Hallmark Channel, and beauty retailer Sephora ended its partnership with Olivia Jade last year.
And I remember just like freezing and feeling so ashamed. I went home and hid myself for probably like 3 or 4 months.
Laughlin has been in this low-security federal prison about 40 miles outside of San Francisco since October, the same one where Desperate Housewives star Felicity Huffman served time for paying a fixer thousands of dollars to correct her daughter's college board test.
Is no justifying or excusing what happened, because what happened was wrong. And I think every single person in my family can be like, that was messed up. That was a big mistake.
Gotti, have there been any coronavirus concerns while Laughlin was in prison?
Yeah, Joe, so far we know that at least 185 inmates at the prison where Laughlin was held have tested positive for the virus, which works out to about 20% of the prison population. Many women have been asking to be released early because of the COVID-19 spread, but the Bureau of Prisons says that it's taken steps to reduce crowding and maximize social distancing. Joe?
All right, Gotti, thank you so much. And that does it for this hour of Morning News Now.
The news, of course, continues right now.
Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, better late than never. President Trump, in a stunning reversal, has signed that $900 billion coronavirus relief package. The reasoning behind the president's change of heart and when you could see that extra cash in your pocket. Adverse reaction, a Boston doctor experiencing a severe allergic episode after receiving Moderna's vaccine. How that doctor is doing this morning and the underlying condition that may have caused the reaction. Searching for why the suspect in the Nashville Christmas bombing confirmed to have died in the blast, according to investigators. The man responsible and the latest on a possible motive. And royal revisions. Even Queen Elizabeth is forced to make changes during the pandemic. How Her Majesty spent Christmas this year, ending decades of royal custom. And I think I speak on behalf of both of us when I say that it is wonderful to be back, but we were not out for the reason that you may have thought, unfortunately.
We'd love to say that we took time off over the holidays. That was planned, but it wasn't planned. Sadly, I ended up with COVID a couple weeks ago. Thankfully, it was a very mild case. I'm obviously feeling much better now, which is why I'm here. We'll talk more about it a little bit later in the show. But COVID hitting home for us here in our News Now family. But thankfully, everyone's doing okay.
Absolutely. And thanks to how responsible Joe was about everything, which we will get into. I did not get sick. I was quarantining because of my exposure to him. But we are good. We are so happy that you're back and feeling better. That is good news. And we're going to start with some other good news, which is that relief is finally on the way for the millions financially impacted by the pandemic. In a major reversal, President Trump has signed a $2.3 trillion package that combines COVID relief with government funding. But the delay comes at a cost. Unemployment benefits for 14 million people lapsed, and the stimulus checks should have started going out this week.
Help could not come at a more dire time. The U.S. now has passed 19 million cases since the start of the pandemic. Hospital ICUs are filling up, and two types of lines are growing this holiday season, lines for COVID testing and for food banks. We have a team of reporters covering every angle of this major story for millions of Americans. Let's begin with NBC News national political reporter Josh Letterman following the president in West Palm Beach, Florida, and NBC News correspondent Leanne Caldwell, who's covering Capitol Hill. Josh, I want to start with you. The president stalled on signing this, saying he wanted the stimulus checks to be $2,000 instead of $600. He didn't get what he wanted, so do we know why he reversed course and signed the bill as is?
Well, good morning, guys. And Joe, we are so glad to hear that you made a full recovery. The president seemed to have no really other option other than to relent after the political pressure was quickly mushrooming and there was no clear path out of this for him. It was clear that the president was not going to be able to get Congress to send him some type of new bill that incorporated the changes that he wanted. And nobody could really understand or explain why the president waited until after Congress had actually passed this legislation with the involvement of his own negotiators who had signaled to Congress the president not only supported this, but indeed intended to sign it. And as a result, it became clear that the only way for the the president not to be blamed for a government shutdown that would have taken effect at midnight tonight, as well as the dire consequences of so many of these relief programs being held up. And the president ultimately changed course, but tried to do it with some of these fig leaves, suggesting that he got some type of commitment from Congress to do what he's asking for here, even though there's no real teeth there and no guarantee the president is going to get any of that.
Josh, the president says he still wants some parts of the bill changed. So what does he want to see?
Well, the president says that he's sending back to Congress basically a line item list of items that were in the spending bill that he no longer wants to be in there. And he wants them to essentially claw back that money. Now, we should point out these are a lot of particularly foreign aid programs. They were in the president's own budget that he sent to Congress. Perhaps he was not aware of all of what was in his own budget request, but he didn't decide until after it passed that he no longer thought that was spending. He called it pork. And so he's basically asking Congress to use an obscure law called the Impoundment Control Act that we first heard about earlier this year when it actually came up during the impeachment crisis. So he wants Congress to essentially take unused funds and take them back. But Nita Lowey, the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee in the House, already making clear the president can say whatever he wants, but Congress has no intention of following through on that.
So let's bring in Leanne. So what are top congressional leaders saying about all this? Is there any chance or is there even the will to increase the checks to $2,000?
Well, Joe, since the president decided to stall signing of this COVID relief bill and demanding $2,000 checks, Democrats right away got on that bandwagon for $2,000 checks and said, bring it, let's do it. So House Democrats plan today to vote on a measure that would increase those checks to $2,000. And Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer said that he would try to force the same vote in the Senate. Well, that was attempted before, both in the House and the Senate, and blocked by Republicans. This is something that the president's own party does not support, these increased checks. And so what Democrats are going to do is they're going to take advantage of the president's position and put Republicans on guard, which is really critical, especially before they're a week and a half before this Georgia special election, which will decide control of the Senate, Joe.
So, Josh, do we know if the president has discussed any of this with top Republican leaders who are on Capitol Hill?
Well, we know he got a visit from Senator Lindsey Graham, a top Republican and close Trump ally, who showed up here in South Florida, played a round of golf with the president as we were all trying to figure out what he was going to do on this. Graham emerged from that golf game saying the president was more committed than ever to these changes that he wanted. Presumably, the president was also in touch with congressional leaders, or at least the White House was, because McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, had a statement ready to go the minute that it was announced the president had signed this. But we don't know of any specific conversations, and clearly the president not seeing eye to eye with congressional leaders who had expended a lot of political capital to get their own members on board signing this agreement, only to see the president change the goalpost at the very last minute. And that's why it was so notable that all these things the president says he wants changed. He wants these $2,000 checks. He wants this money clawed back. He wants some type of an investigation from the House and Senate on what his allegations of voter fraud. McConnell didn't promise any of that in the statement that he issued on this within minutes of the president announcing he'd sign this bill.
And Leanne, I want to ask you about what has been really the president's biggest issue in recent weeks. Last night, he claimed without evidence that, quote, the House and Senate have agreed to focus strongly on the very substantial voter fraud, which he says took place during the presidential election. Now, this Congress ends in 6 days. Is there anything they might do beforehand on this issue?
So, Joe, Congress focusing strongly is an extremely vague statement that means absolutely nothing. You mentioned there are 6 days left in this Congress. Perhaps we might see a few statements or press releases from members who support the president and his investigations into voter fraud. But the Congress actually opening some sort of investigation, the chances of that are practically zero. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, who runs the House, obviously, has zero plans to do this. In fact, the House is coming back today just to override his veto of the National Defense Authorization Bill. The Senate is back in town tomorrow just to do the same. So I think that the things that the president is demanding in his press release are a lot of empty promises for people who tried to convince him to sign this legislation, Joe.
Leanne Caldwell, Josh Letterman, thanks so much for kicking off our coverage this morning. We appreciate it.
Now, ahead of President Trump's signing of the pandemic relief bill, President-elect Joe Biden released a statement Saturday calling Trump's initial refusal to sign the bill a, quote, abdication of responsibility with devastating consequences, while also praising some members of Congress for their bipartisan action to reach compromise and get the bill passed. NBC News White House correspondent Jeff Bennett and political reporter for The Washington Post Eugene Scott join us now. Good morning to both of you. Jeff, I'm going to start with you and with the latest reaction from the Biden transition team now that President Trump has actually signed the relief bill. Of course, what I was just reading from was a statement before he had done so. But also, what do we expect to hear from President-elect Biden today, and what will he address in those remarks that are planned for later?
Well, we know that the president-elect will meet with his national security and foreign policy teams, and then after that deliver remarks here in Wilmington. And we suspect that his remarks will focus on the threat from within, the growing domestic terror threat. We know that the outgoing Trump administration, the FBI, the DHS, have both said that violent extremists, white supremacists, pose a huge risk to the country. We've not heard President Trump speak substantively or extensively about that. And so Joe Biden will step into the void and deliver remarks on that topic. We saw him do the same last week. He spoke extensively about the COVID crisis and cybersecurity following that massive suspected Russia hack of U.S. government agencies and companies. And so what we're increasingly seeing with 23 days left to go before Joe Biden is sworn in is him pivot from planning to presiding. He is filling the void, what with President Trump having been out of sight really for the last few weeks or so, Savannah.
And now, Eugene, President-elect Biden has regularly projected this sense of confidence in terms of his ability to strike bipartisanship and work across the aisle, particularly noting his history of deal-making on the Hill. But as you point out in a recent analysis, some Republicans' loyalty to President Trump may actually cast doubt on that. So how do you expect this to work out for Biden once he takes office?
Well, that remains to be seen, obviously, given that there are still Republican lawmakers in Congress who are siding with Trump and have made it clear that they are working to prevent the process to getting President-elect Biden inaugurated to make it stop. It's in early January. They really want to support efforts to refuse to allow him to move forward with this. But what I think we see Biden doing in this statement, trying to encourage people on both sides of the aisle to come together like they recently have in their effort to get this bill moving forward, because ultimately we know that what's in the best interest of all Americans, especially those in need, is for Republicans and Democrats to work together. And if they do not, there will be consequences for those on both sides of the aisle, but disproportionately right now, likely Republicans, given that their leader is the one that has slowed this process down.
And now, Eugene, also in a roundtable with columnists last week, Biden warned about, quote, landmines that the Trump administration may leave behind across the government. What kind of obstacles is the Biden team preparing for to come across once they take over?
Well, as you likely recall, the President Trump's team was very slow to get information to President-elect Biden after the election was called for him, making it difficult for the transition team to move forward at the speed that we historically have seen these teams move forward in following an election. And so what the Biden team is trying to do is rely on the fact that there's so many veterans and experienced professionals in their administration moving forward who actually do not have to work with such a steep learning curve that perhaps some of the things that would have normally caused significant challenges for a new administration perhaps won't be as difficult for them. And so this is why you see them relying so heavily on experience and their expertise.
Absolutely. Now, Jeff, Biden will be meeting with national security and foreign policy advisors ahead of his remarks today. What can we expect from the transition this week? Any additional cabinet announcements or anything like that?
Well, there are 4 cabinet positions left for him to announce. Labor Secretary, Commerce Secretary, Small Business Administration leader, and then Attorney General. And so there, according to our reporting, the short list remains the same. You've got Merrick Garland, Doug Jones, and Sally Yates. Garland and Jones are considered to be the more easily confirmed by the Senate. Yet Sally Yates is really the leading choice of progressives and civil rights advocates. And so Biden, in his latest comments about it, has said that he has not yet made up his mind, and that tracks with our reporting. But we do expect potentially for him to announce his remaining selections as early as this week, Savannah.
All right, Jeff and Eugene, thanks so much.
Now to Tennessee, where this morning the FBI is looking for a motive behind the explosion that rocked downtown Nashville on Christmas Day. Dramatic new video from police shows the exact moment, the blast, when a recreational vehicle exploded after broadcasting a warning. 3 people were injured and several buildings were damaged. Investigators say this is the man responsible. 63-year-old Anthony Quinn Warner is believed to have acted alone. He died in the explosion. And some of the 6 Nashville police officers who cleared the scene moments before the explosion are speaking out for the first time. Let's go now to our team of correspondents who are tracking all these new developments. NBC's Shaquille Brewster joins us from Nashville, and Tom Winter is monitoring the latest on the investigation. Shaq, let's start with you. You've been there in Nashville since Christmas, the day of the explosion. Investigators have now answered some key questions. So what is the latest from the scene?
Well, here in Nashville, while some of the restrictions in downtown area are starting to ease up, much of the blast site is still inaccessible, not just to reporters, but to the homeowners and business owners in the area. And that's because we know investigators are still trying to work through and process that scene. They're taking their time. Remember, this is a blast site that affected 41 different businesses, giving them damage and also causing the collapse of one building after or on that Christmas morning. So we know investigators are taking their time going through this area that is not only one block, but really extends well beyond there. They have been making some progress, though, and that is why we know the name of the bomber, Anthony Warner. They say that it was a mix of crucial tips, what they call crucial tips from the public, and forensic evidence that they recovered at the scene that helped them make that identification fairly quickly. We knew early on that they had uncovered some what they called human tissue, some possible remains from that blast site. They were able to cross-analyze that with some DNA acquired from other sources. And then there was a piece of the vehicle that they were able to find in that blast radius that had the vehicle identification number, and they connected that to Anthony Warner. So we know there's a lot of work left to be done. They're still trying to figure out motives and all that, but what we know right now is they're still going through that scene, and they're saying it will take some time before folks can go back.
Tom, turning to you now, investigators are saying the suspect acted alone. What do we know so far about how he allegedly did this?
So, Joe, one of the things that we're starting to learn here is a little bit about some of the investigative steps, and Shaquille laid those out for you. Some of those investigative steps include the ability to quickly go through somebody's communications, emails, et cetera, when there's a national security investigation like this. And so they were able to go through Warner's communications pretty fast. That's very typical in these type of investigations once they have somebody as a subject of that investigation. And I think it would have been fairly easy once they circled Warner to determine whether or not he'd been communicating with somebody ahead of this attack. It's something that led them to that conclusion that you alluded to. Let's listen to the Nashville police chief describe what they say they've learned so far.
And we can tell you that Anthony Warner is the man believed to be responsible for this horrible crime. There is no indication presently that anyone else was involved in this crime. As I've said earlier and several times before, Nashville is considered safe. There are no known threats against this city.
What that tells me, Joe, is that at this point they've likely learned or they likely believe that not only did Anthony Warner act alone as far as driving this RV to that location, setting it off, as we saw in the video earlier, but he is the bomb maker himself. Otherwise, I don't think they would be so certain about whether or not the Nashville area was safe, Joe.
And Tom, investigators still have not figured out a motive, but we are learning about something the suspect may have told someone before the explosion. What can you tell us about that?
That's right. Our latest reporting from myself and my colleague Jonathan Dienst is that investigators are investigating